I always believed you could spot the beginning of a disaster, like a hairline crack in a windshield, or a chill you can't shake on a spring morning. But the truth is, it starts in silence. My journey began with a quick, distracted goodbye from my wife, Marta, a peck on the cheek, her keys jingling, and the door closing behind her. Everything looked normal. But that's the thing about betrayal. It never starts with fireworks. My name is Evan Mitchell, and at 49, I thought I had life figured out. Senior finance manager at Hartwell Industries, married 24 years to the woman I met in college, father to two incredible kids who were making their own way in the world. Ross was 22, fresh out of engineering school and already landing interviews at tech companies. Amelia was 20, a junior at State studying journalism with dreams of changing the world one story at a time. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in February. Snow was falling hard outside our modest two-story home in Millfield, accumulating on the sidewalks and making the commute treacherous. I had packed my overnight bag for a finance conference in Chicago, one of those mandatory corporate gatherings where middle management pretends to learn revolutionary accounting methods that haven't changed since the 80s. "Drive safe," Marta called from the kitchen, not looking up from her laptop. She was already dressed for work in her sharp black blazer, the one that made her look like the successful advertising executive she'd become over the past 5 years. Her promotion to creative director at Morrison & Associates had changed her, given her a confidence I admired but sometimes felt distant from. "Always do," I replied, kissing the top of her head. Her auburn hair smelled like the expensive shampoo she'd started buying, something with French words on the bottle. "I'll call when I get to the hotel." She nodded absently, fingers clicking across the keyboard. "Victoria might stop by later. She's having issues with Mike again." Victoria. Marta's younger sister, 38 and perpetually dramatic. If there was trouble to be found, Victoria would find it, create it, or marry it. Her on-again, off-again relationship with Mike Henderson had been the source of family tension for 3 years now. Mike was a decent guy, worked construction, coached Little League on weekends, treated Victoria like a queen even when she didn't deserve it. "What kind of issues?" I asked, shouldering my laptop bag. "The usual. She thinks he's too controlling. He thinks she spends too much money." Marta's tone carried that edge it always got when discussing her sister's romantic disasters. I told her she could stay in the guest room if things get heated. I wanted to point out that Victoria's definition of controlling usually meant expecting basic adult responsibility, but I'd learned that criticizing her sister was a minefield I preferred to avoid. Instead, I grabbed my keys and headed for the garage. The drive to the airport took twice as long as usual. Snow was coming down in thick, wet flakes that clung to my windshield despite the wipers working overtime. By the time I reached the departure terminal, flights were already being delayed. The electronic boards flickered with red text. Delayed, canceled. I found a seat near my gate and called the office to let them know I might miss the opening session. Janet, my assistant, assured me the world wouldn't end if I arrived a day late. She'd been with the company 15 years and had seen every crisis corporate America could manufacture. "Weather's supposed to clear up by tomorrow," she said. "Maybe you'll get a night at home instead of in some overpriced hotel room." The thought appealed to me more than it should have. Marta and I hadn't spent an evening together in weeks. Between her late nights at the agency and my own work demands, we'd been passing like ships, communicating through sticky notes left on the refrigerator and brief text messages about grocery lists and utility bills. When was the last time we'd actually talked? Really talked, not just the logistics of running a household and managing careers. I couldn't remember, and that realization settled in my stomach like a stone. 3 hours later, the airline officially canceled all flights to Chicago. The storm had intensified, and the meteorologists were predicting 8 to 10 inches of accumulation. I gathered my bags and joined the exodus of frustrated travelers heading back to the parking garage. The drive home was even worse than the morning trip. What should have been a 40-minute journey stretched to an hour and a half of white-knuckle driving through increasingly treacherous conditions. Other cars crawled along the interstate like cautious beetles, hazard lights blinking through the snow. I used the time to think about my marriage, something I'd been avoiding lately. Marta and I had been happy once, really happy. We'd met in Professor Davidson's economics class during my senior year, her junior year. She was brilliant, funny, and had this way of making even the most boring lecture feel like a conversation between friends. Our early years together were filled with the kind of adventures that seem impossible once you have a mortgage and children. Weekend trips to nowhere in particular, long conversations that lasted until sunrise, making love on Sunday mornings while the coffee grew cold in the kitchen. We were partners in every sense of the word, but somewhere along the way, life had gotten in the way of living. The kids arrived, wonderful, exhausting, expensive kids who demanded everything we had to give. My career required longer hours and more travel. Marta's ambitions, put on hold during the early parenting years, roared back to life with a vengeance once Ross and Amelia were old enough to manage themselves. I wasn't complaining. I was proud of her success. The agency recognized her talent and rewarded it accordingly. Her salary had surpassed mine 2 years ago, a fact that didn't bother me, but seemed to create an invisible tension between us. She'd grown more independent, more confident, more willing to make decisions without consulting me first. Maybe that was natural. Maybe that was healthy. But it felt like we were becoming strangers who shared a mortgage and a last name. By the time I pulled into our driveway, it was nearly 6 o'clock. The house was dark except for the blue glow of the television in the living room. Marta's car was gone, which surprised me. She usually got home by 5:30 on Tuesdays. I let myself in through the front door, stomping snow off my boots and hanging my coat in the hall closet. The house felt empty in that particular way that goes beyond mere silence. It was the absence of presence, the feeling that no one had been here for hours. "Marta?" I called out, more from habit than expectation. No answer. The television was tuned to one of those home renovation shows Marta liked to watch while she worked on her laptop. A cheerful couple was debating paint colors for their kitchen while upbeat music played in the background. I found the remote and turned down the volume. My phone buzzed. A text from Marta. "Working late. Leftover pasta in fridge. Don't wait up." Working late wasn't unusual. The advertising business ran on impossible deadlines and last-minute client demands. But something about the message felt off. Maybe it was the lack of her usual emoji, or the fact that she hadn't asked about my canceled flight. I'd sent her a text from the airport hours ago, letting her know I was coming home. I heated up the pasta and ate it standing at the kitchen counter, looking out at our backyard. The snow had transformed the familiar landscape into something alien and beautiful. The kids' old swing set was buried up to its chains, and the fence posts looked like a line of ghosts marching toward the woods behind our property. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. After dinner, I tried calling Marta. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Her voice, professional and cheerful, asked me to leave a message and promised she'd get back to me as soon as possible. "Hey, it's me. Flight got canceled, so I'm home for the night. Give me a call when you get this. Love you." An hour passed, then 2. I tried to focus on the television, flipping through channels without really seeing anything. My mind kept returning to that morning's goodbye, analyzing it like a financial report that didn't quite add up. Marta had seemed distracted, but that wasn't unusual. She'd been distracted a lot lately. At 9 o'clock, I called again. This time it went straight to voicemail. I was starting to worry. The roads were terrible, and even experienced drivers were sliding into ditches. I checked the local news website for accident reports but found nothing involving her car or license plate number. Then I remembered something. Marta had mentioned Victoria might stop by. Maybe they'd gone out together, sisters bonding over whatever crisis Victoria was manufacturing this week. It would explain why Marta wasn't answering her phone. Victoria demanded complete attention when she was in crisis mode. I called Victoria's number, a contact I rarely used except for family emergencies and birthday reminders. Evan? Victoria's voice was surprised, slightly slurred. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I'm looking for Marta. She said you might be stopping by tonight. There was a pause, the kind of pause that lasts a heartbeat too long. Oh, that. No, I decided to stay home. This weather is crazy. Do you know where she is? She's not answering her phone. Another pause. Probably just busy at work. You know how she gets when she's on a deadline. Victoria's voice carried an odd note, something I couldn't quite identify. Nervousness? Guilt? Or maybe just the effects of whatever she'd been drinking. Victoria had always been a wine-with-dinner person who sometimes forgot to stop at one glass. Yeah, probably, I agreed, though something in my gut disagreed. If you hear from her, ask her to call me. Sure thing. Hey, Evan, don't worry so much. Marta's a big girl. The line went quiet, and I was left staring at my phone, that stone in my stomach growing heavier. At 10:30, I tried one more time. The call went to voicemail immediately, which meant either her phone was turned off or the battery had run out. Neither was like Marta. She was obsessive about keeping her phone charged, a habit born from years of being on call for client emergencies. I was starting to consider calling the police when I heard a car in the driveway. Relief flooded through me as I hurried to the front window, but it was just our neighbor's teenage son coming home from his job at the movie theater. The kid drove like he was afraid his car might dissolve if he went faster than 5 miles per hour. I settled back onto the couch and tried to think rationally. Marta was fine. She was working late, dealing with some advertising crisis that required her complete attention. Her phone battery had gone down, or she'd left it in another room while she focused on whatever project was consuming her time. These things happened. In 24 years of marriage, we'd had our share of miscommunications and missed connections. Tomorrow we'd laugh about how worried I'd gotten over nothing. But as I sat there in the blue glow of the television, watching strangers renovate their dream kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The house felt different, empty in a way that had nothing to do with Marta's physical absence. I thought about calling Ross or Amelia, but what would I say? Your mother is 3 hours late and not answering her phone sounded paranoid when I said it in my head. They were building their own lives, dealing with their own stresses. The last thing they needed was their father having a panic attack over mom, working late. So I waited, dozed fitfully on the couch, waking every time a car passed on our street or the house settled around me. The snow kept falling, muffling the world in white silence. At midnight, I gave up and went to bed. Marta's side was cold and undisturbed, her pillow still perfectly fluffed from the morning. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening for the sound of her key in the front door, her footsteps on the stairs, the familiar routine of her getting ready for bed. But the only sounds were the wind against the windows and the occasional groan of tree branches heavy with snow. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I started to drift off, my mind would jolt me awake with questions I didn't want to ask and scenarios I didn't want to consider. Where was my wife? Why wasn't she answering her phone? And why did Victoria sound so strange when I called? By morning, I would have answers, but they wouldn't be the answers I wanted, and they would change everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd loved for more than half my adult life. The snow kept falling, covering our tracks, erasing the evidence of where we'd been and where we were going. If I'd known what I was about to discover, I might have stayed in that bed forever, holding on to the last few hours of ignorance like a man clinging to a life preserver in a storm. But morning always comes, whether you're ready for it or not. I woke up alone at 6:15, same as always. My internal clock had been set to that time for 20 years, long enough that I didn't need an alarm anymore. The first thing I did was reach across the bed, hoping to find Marta's warm presence beside me. The sheets were cold and undisturbed. Downstairs, I found no evidence that she'd come home during the night. No coffee mug in the sink, no keys on the counter, no shoes kicked off by the front door. The pasta I'd left covered on the stove was exactly as I'd left it. I made coffee and tried her phone again. Straight to voicemail. This was no longer about working late or a forgotten phone charger. This was something else entirely, and the possibilities racing through my mind were making it hard to think clearly. Car accident, medical emergency, or worse, something I didn't want to acknowledge even to myself. I called Morrison and Associates and asked for Marta's extension. The receptionist, a young woman whose cheerful voice sounded like she'd had too much caffeine already, put me through to Marta's voicemail. "I'm trying to reach my wife, Marta Mitchell," I explained when the receptionist came back on the line. "She didn't come home last night, and I'm worried something might have happened." "Oh, Mr. Mitchell, I'm sorry, but Marta isn't in this week. She's taking some personal time." The coffee mug slipped in my hand, and I had to grab it with both hands to keep from dropping it. "Personal time?" "Yes, sir. She put in the request last Friday. Is everything okay?" Personal time. Marta had requested time off work and hadn't mentioned it to me. While I was packing for a conference she knew was canceled, she was planning something that required her to lie about her whereabouts. "Everything's fine," I managed. "I must have gotten my wires crossed. Thanks." I hung up before the receptionist could respond, my mind racing through the implications. Marta had lied to me about working late. She'd lied about where she was going. She'd planned this deception days in advance, which meant it wasn't spontaneous or innocent. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through my phone's contacts, looking for Jake Morrison, Marta's colleague and friend. Jake was one of the senior partners at the agency, a guy about my age who'd always been friendly at company parties and social events. If anyone would know what Marta was really doing, it would be Jake. "Evan, good to hear from you." Jake's voice was warm and unsuspecting. "How's that conference going?" "Actually, it got canceled because of the snow. Listen, Jake, I'm trying to track down Marta. She didn't come home last night, and I'm getting worried." There was a pause. "Didn't come home? That's strange. I thought she was taking the week off to spend time with you." "Spend time with me?" "Yeah, she mentioned you guys were planning some kind of romantic getaway. Said it had been too long since you'd had time alone together." Jake's voice carried a note of confusion now. "Wait, if you're at home and she's not, then where?" I ended the call. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture I didn't want to see. Marta had told her office she was taking personal time to spend with me. She'd told me she was working late. She'd arranged for both of us to have alibis for her absence, except my alibi had fallen apart when the weather canceled my conference. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, trying to make sense of what I was learning. In 24 years of marriage, Marta had never lied to me about anything significant. Sure, there were the small deceptions all couples engaged in, surprise parties, hidden purchases, white lies to spare feelings. But this was different. This was elaborate and premeditated. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, hope flared in my chest, but it was just a notification from my bank about a large withdrawal from our joint checking account. $500, taken yesterday afternoon from an ATM I didn't recognize. I opened the banking app and scrolled through our recent transactions. There were several I didn't recognize. Dinner at an expensive restaurant I'd never heard of. A charge at a boutique clothing store. Gas purchases from a station on the other side of town, nowhere near Marta's usual routes. The evidence was mounting, but evidence of what? An affair seemed like the obvious conclusion, but I couldn't make myself believe it. Not Marta. Not after everything we'd built together. I thought about Victoria's strange reaction when I'd called her the night before. The pause before she answered, the slight slur in her voice, the way she'd deflected my questions about Marta's whereabouts. Victoria had always been trouble, but she was family. Marta's loyalty to her sister was absolute, sometimes frustratingly so. 3 years ago, when I'd discovered Victoria was having an affair with a married man from her office, I'd insisted we tell Mike. Marta had resisted, arguing that it wasn't our business, that Victoria would figure things out on her own. "She's my sister," Marta had said during one of our heated discussions about the situation. "I can't betray her trust." "What about Mike's trust?" I'd countered. "He's planning to propose to her, Marta. He has a right to know what kind of person he's thinking about marrying." The argument had lasted for weeks. Marta accused me of being judgmental and self-righteous. I accused her of enabling Victoria's destructive behavior. In the end, I'd made the decision unilaterally. I told Mike what I'd seen, showed him the evidence I'd accidentally discovered when Victoria left her phone unlocked at a family barbecue. The fallout had been explosive. Victoria had screamed at me, called me every name she could think of, accused me of destroying her happiness out of jealousy and spite. Mike had broken up with her immediately, and Victoria had spent 6 months bouncing between our guest room and various friends' couches while she tried to put her life back together. Marta had forgiven me eventually, but something had changed between us after that incident. She'd become more protective of her privacy, more careful about what she shared with me. I'd told myself it was natural, that she was just being cautious about putting me in another position where I might feel compelled to interfere in her family's business. But now I wondered if there had been more to it than that. Had my betrayal of Victoria's secret made Marta question whether she could trust me with her own secrets? I was still sitting at the kitchen table, lost in these thoughts, when my phone rang. Marta's name appeared on the screen, and I answered so quickly I nearly dropped the device. "Marta? Thank God. Where are you?" "I'm at home, honey. Where else would I be?" Her voice sounded normal, cheerful even, but there was something underneath it, a forced quality that made my skin crawl. "You're at home?" "I'm at home, Marta. You're not here." There was a pause, the same kind of pause I'd heard from Victoria the night before. "What do you mean you're at home? Aren't you in Chicago?" "The flight was canceled. I've been here since yesterday evening, waiting for you to come home. Where are you, really?" Another pause, longer this time. I could hear background noise, voices, music, the clink of glassware. Wherever she was, it wasn't quiet, and it wasn't our house. There was an emergency at work. I had to stay at the office all night. We're dealing with a crisis for one of our major clients." The lie came so smoothly, so naturally, that it took my breath away. She was looking at our empty house through the phone, knowing I was sitting in our kitchen, and she was lying directly to my face without hesitation. "Which client?" I asked. "What?" "Which client is having the emergency?" It's confidential, Evan. You know I can't discuss client business with you." "I called the office this morning. They said you're taking personal time this week." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, could feel the foundation of my marriage cracking beneath me like ice on a frozen lake. "I can explain," she said finally. "I'm listening." "Not over the phone. I'll be home in a couple of hours, and we can talk then." "Where are you, Marta?" "I have to go. I love you." The line went quiet, and I was left staring at my phone, wondering who the woman on the other end of that call had been. It sounded like my wife, but my wife didn't lie to me. My wife didn't disappear overnight without explanation. My wife didn't take secret vacations and make mysterious ATM withdrawals. Unless she did, and I'd just been too blind or too trusting to notice. I thought about waiting for her to come home, sitting in the living room like a disappointed parent waiting for a teenager to return from breaking curfew. But something inside me rebelled against that image. I wasn't going to be the naive husband, sitting at home while his wife spun increasingly elaborate lies to cover her tracks. I needed to know the truth, and I needed to know it now. I grabbed my laptop and opened the Find My Phone app we'd installed on our devices years ago, back when Ross was a teenager, and we wanted to keep track of his whereabouts. Marta and I had kept the app active as a safety measure. If one of us was in an accident or emergency, the other could locate them quickly. I'd never used it to spy on her. The thought had never even occurred to me. Her phone's location appeared on the map as a small blue dot, and my stomach dropped. She wasn't at the office. She wasn't at any office. According to the GPS, she was at an address I didn't recognize, in an upscale neighborhood called Mills Lake, about 30 minutes from our house. Mills Lake was where the wealthy people lived. Doctors, lawyers, business executives who made more in a year than I made in 5. The houses there were estates rather than homes, sprawling properties with private driveways and gates designed to keep ordinary people like me at a respectful distance. What was my wife doing in Mills Lake? I wrote down the address and grabbed my keys. The snow had stopped falling, but the roads were still treacherous. It took me 45 minutes to reach the neighborhood, driving carefully through streets that had been plowed and salted with the kind of efficiency that money could buy. The address led me to a gated community within Mills Lake, an even more exclusive enclave called Lakeshore Estates. The houses here weren't visible from the road, hidden behind walls and mature landscaping that probably cost more than my annual salary. I parked on the street outside the community gates and tried to figure out my next move. I couldn't just drive up to the front door and demand an explanation. For one thing, I didn't know which house was the right one. The GPS was only accurate to within a few hundred feet. For another, I wasn't ready for a confrontation. Not yet. I needed to see for myself what was happening before I decided how to respond. The community was built around a small lake, with walking trails that wound between the properties. I found a parking area for the public trail access and left my car there, hoping it wouldn't look too suspicious. Then I started walking. The trail was well maintained despite the snow, with regular benches and informational plaques about the local wildlife. It was the kind of place where wealthy people came to jog and feel connected to nature without actually leaving their comfort zone. I followed the trail around the lake, checking my phone periodically to see if I was getting closer to Marta's location. The GPS dot seemed to be moving slightly, which meant she was probably inside one of the houses rather than standing still outside. After 20 minutes of walking, I found myself across the lake from a massive Tudor-style mansion that seemed to match the GPS coordinates. Even from a distance, I could see that something was happening there. Cars were parked along the circular driveway, and lights were on in most of the windows despite the early hour. I left the trail and made my way closer, using the trees and landscaping for cover. The property was enormous, with manicured gardens and a private dock extending into the lake. Through the large windows, I could see people moving around inside, a party or gathering of some kind. And then I saw her. Marta was standing in what appeared to be a living room, wearing a dress I'd never seen before. It was red and expensive looking, the kind of thing she might wear to a company Christmas party or anniversary dinner. Her hair was styled differently, more elaborate than her usual professional look. She was laughing at something someone had said, holding a wine glass, looking relaxed and happy in a way I hadn't seen in months. Standing next to her was Victoria. My sister-in-law was dressed similarly in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my mortgage payment. She had her arm around a man I didn't recognize, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of confident posture that came from never having to worry about money. As I watched, Marta moved closer to another man, someone I also didn't recognize. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with silver hair and an expensive suit. When he put his hand on the small of her back, she didn't pull away. I felt like I was watching a movie, Some surreal drama where actors who looked like my wife and sister-in-law were playing roles I didn't understand. This couldn't be real. Marta didn't go to parties without me. She didn't wear dresses I'd never seen. She didn't let strange men put their hands on her. But there she was, doing all of those things, and more. As I watched from my hiding spot in the trees, the man with the silver hair leaned down and whispered something in Marta's ear. She tilted her head back and laughed, a genuine, delighted sound that carried across the water. Then she stood on her tiptoes and kissed him. Not a friendly peck on the cheek, a real kiss, intimate and lingering. My legs gave out, and I found myself sitting in the snow, staring across the lake at the destruction of everything I thought I knew about my life. 24 years of marriage, 2 children, a shared history that included everything from midnight feedings to mortgage applications, and it was all crumbling in front of me like a house built on sand. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for my clothes to get soaked through, long enough for my fingers to go numb with cold. I watched my wife flirt and laugh and drink with people I'd never met, in a world I'd never been invited to join. Eventually, I forced myself to stand up and walk back to my car. My mind was numb, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I'd witnessed. The drive home passed in a blur of snow-covered streets and traffic lights that seemed to take forever to change. When I got home, I sat in the driveway for a long time, staring at our house. It looked the same as always, modest, comfortable, the kind of place where ordinary people lived ordinary lives. But I wasn't ordinary anymore. I was the husband who didn't know his wife was living a double life. I was the fool who'd believed in something that had never really existed. Inside, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and tried to figure out what to do next. Confrontation seemed pointless. What was I going to say? I saw you at a party with another man? She'd already proven she could lie to me without hesitation. Whatever explanation she offered would probably be another fiction designed to keep me in the dark. Divorce seemed like the logical next step, but the thought of it made me feel hollow inside. Despite what I'd just witnessed, I still loved her. Or maybe I loved the version of her I'd thought I knew. Either way, the idea of ending our marriage felt like cutting off a limb, but I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen. I couldn't go back to being the trusting husband who believed his wife's explanations without question. I was still sitting at the kitchen table, nursing my whiskey and wrestling with these thoughts, when I heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, I watched Marta get out of her sedan and walk toward the front door. She moved carefully, like someone who'd had a few drinks and was trying not to show it. She came through the front door with a bright smile and a cheerful, "I'm home," that sounded like a performance. "How was your emergency?" I asked without getting up from the table. "Exhausting," she said, hanging up her coat. "But we got it sorted out, crisis averted." She was still wearing the red dress from the party, though she'd thrown a cardigan over it. Her makeup was smudged, and her hair had lost some of its earlier perfection. "You look nice," I said. "That's a beautiful dress." "This old thing?" She glanced down at herself as if she'd forgotten what she was wearing. "I keep some nicer clothes at the office for client meetings." Another lie, delivered with the same casual confidence as all the others. "I'm going to take a shower," she said. "Then maybe we can spend some time together since you're home unexpectedly." She kissed the top of my head as she passed, and I caught a whiff of cologne that wasn't mine mixed with wine and cigarette smoke. The scent of another world, another life that didn't include me. After she went upstairs, I sat in the kitchen and listened to the sound of running water. In a few minutes, she would come back downstairs, probably wearing her comfortable clothes and her familiar smile. She would ask about my canceled conference and make sympathetic noises about the weather. She would act like the wife I'd known for 24 years, and I would have to decide whether to keep pretending along with her or whether it was time to stop living in a fantasy and start dealing with reality. The water stopped running, and I heard her moving around upstairs, getting dressed, brushing her teeth, preparing to return to the role of devoted wife and mother. I finished my whiskey and made my decision. The next few days passed in a strange kind of suspended animation. Marta went back to her normal routine, or what I now realized was her performance of a normal routine. She made coffee in the mornings, asked about my work, discussed plans for Ross's upcoming birthday. She was attentive, affectionate even, as if she was trying to make up for her mysterious absence. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen at that mansion. The image of her kissing another man played in my mind like a broken record, each replay adding new details I'd missed the first time. The way she'd touched his arm while they talked. The comfortable familiarity between her and Victoria in that expensive setting. The ease with which she'd moved through a world I didn't know existed. I found myself studying her when she wasn't looking, searching for signs of the woman I'd seen across the lake. Sometimes I caught glimpses, a certain smile when she was reading text messages, a new confidence in how she carried herself, small changes that might have seemed positive if I didn't know their source. On Thursday evening, she announced she was going out with some colleagues from work. "Just drinks and dinner," she said, applying lipstick in the hallway mirror. "You know how it is, team building and office politics." "Which colleagues?" I asked. "Oh, just some of the creative team. You wouldn't know them." Another lie. I was starting to collect them like evidence, filing each deception away in my memory. "What time will you be home?" "Not too late. Probably around 11. She kissed me goodbye, and I watched her drive away, wondering if she was heading back to Mills Lake, back to the silver-haired man who could give her things I never could. I waited until her taillights disappeared around the corner, then got in my own car and followed. This time, I was prepared. I'd spent the last few days researching the area, studying maps, figuring out the best vantage points for surveillance. I felt ridiculous doing it, like a character in some cheap detective novel, but I needed to know the truth, even if it destroyed me. She didn't go to Mills Lake. Instead, she drove to an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place with valet parking and a wine list thicker than most novels. I parked across the street and watched her go inside, then waited to see who she was meeting. 20 minutes later, Victoria arrived, followed shortly by two men I recognized from the party. The silver-haired man wasn't among them, which was somehow both disappointing and relieving. I sat in my car for 2 hours, watching them through the restaurant's large windows. They ordered multiple courses, drank expensive wine, laughed frequently. Marta looked radiant, more alive than I'd seen her in years. This wasn't a business dinner or a casual get-together with friends. This was something else entirely. When they finally left the restaurant, I followed them to a hotel bar a few blocks away, the kind of place where wealthy people went to continue conversations that couldn't be finished over dinner. I couldn't get close enough to hear what they were discussing, but I could see the body language, the intimate conversations, the way Marta leaned into one of the men when he whispered something in her ear. She got home at 2 a.m, long past the 11 o'clock she'd promised. I pretended to be asleep when she slipped into bed, but I could smell the alcohol and cigarettes, could feel the distance between us like a physical presence. The next morning, she was cheerful and apologetic. "Sorry I was so late," she said over coffee. "You know how these work things go. One drink turns into 3, and before you know it, you're closing down the bar." "How was the team building?" "Great. Really productive. I think we're going to work well together on the new campaign." I nodded and smiled and played my part in the charade, but inside, something was hardening. The pain of betrayal was transforming into something else. Anger, determination, a cold resolve that surprised me with its intensity. That weekend, while Marta was supposedly running errands, I made some calls of my own. I contacted a divorce attorney, a private investigator, and my financial advisor. I didn't make any commitments, but I gathered information. I learned about asset protection, evidence gathering, and the legal requirements for ending a marriage in our state. I also did something that felt both necessary and terrible. I started documenting everything: photos of unexplained purchases on our credit card statements, screenshots of her location data from the Find My Phone app, a detailed timeline of her lies and contradictions. It felt like I was building a case against the woman I loved, and in a way, I suppose I was. The breaking point came the following Tuesday. I was supposed to be at another conference, a real one this time, in Denver. But at the last minute, I decided not to go. I called in with a family emergency, which felt appropriate given the circumstances. Instead of flying to Colorado, I drove to a hotel near Mills Lake and checked in under my own name. Then I settled in to watch and wait. I didn't have to wait long. Marta's car arrived at the Lakeshore Estates around noon. This time, I was ready with binoculars and a camera with a long lens, tools that made me feel like a stalker but seemed necessary for documenting the truth. The party was smaller this time, more intimate. Through the mansion's windows, I could see maybe a dozen people, all well-dressed, all comfortable in their expensive surroundings. Marta fit right in, wearing another dress I'd never seen, moving through the group like she belonged there. Victoria was there too, still on the arm of the same well-dressed man. But it was Marta I focused on, Marta I watched as she laughed and flirted and played the part of a woman I didn't recognize. The silver-haired man was there, and this time I was close enough to see the way they interacted. There was an intimacy between them that went beyond casual acquaintance. When he touched her, she responded. When she spoke to him, she leaned close, her body language open and inviting. I took pictures, hundreds of them, evidence of a life I'd never been part of, a relationship I'd never suspected. As the afternoon wore on, the party moved outside to the mansion's elaborate patio. Someone had set up a sound system, and couples began dancing on the stone terrace overlooking the lake. I watched my wife dance with another man, watched her smile up at him with the kind of joy I hadn't seen directed at me in years. That's when I made my decision. I pulled out my phone and called Marta's number. Through the binoculars, I watched her check the caller ID and excuse herself from her dance partner. "Hi, honey," she said, her voice slightly breathless. "How's the conference?" "It's great," I lied. "Really informative. Listen, I just wanted to let you know that my flight got moved up. I'll be home around 6 tonight instead of tomorrow morning." I watched her face change, watched the color drain from her cheeks as she processed what I was telling her. "Tonight? But I thought you weren't coming back until Wednesday." Change of plans. The conference ended early and I was able to get on an earlier flight. I should be home by 6:30 at the latest. Through the binoculars, I could see her looking around frantically, probably calculating how long it would take her to get home and establish her alibi. "That's wonderful," she said, but her voice was strained. "I'll be there waiting for you." "Where are you now?" I asked, curious to see what lie she would tell. "Just running some errands. But I'll head home now, so I can be there when you arrive." "Great. I love you." "Love you too." I ended the call and watched the chaos that followed. Marta rushed back to the party, spoke urgently to Victoria and the silver-haired man, then disappeared into the house. Within 10 minutes, she was back outside, changed into casual clothes, looking flustered and anxious. She said quick goodbyes to the group, kissed the silver-haired man on the cheek, a chaste farewell that somehow hurt more than the passionate embrace I'd witnessed before, and hurried to her car. I followed her home, staying far enough back to avoid detection. She drove fast, probably faster than was safe, taking risks to make up time. I found myself hoping she wouldn't get pulled over or have an accident. Despite everything, I didn't want her to get hurt. I gave her a 30-minute head start, then drove home myself. When I walked through the front door, she was in the kitchen, wearing jeans and a sweater, looking like she'd been home all day. "Welcome back," she said, coming over to hug me. "How was Denver?" "Educational," I said, hugging her back and hating myself for the deception. "How was your day?" "Quiet. Just errands and housework. You know how it is." I knew exactly how it was. I knew she'd spent the afternoon at a party with people I'd never met, dancing with a man whose name I didn't know, living a life that had nothing to do with me or our marriage. But I also knew something she didn't know I knew. And for the first time since this nightmare began, that knowledge gave me a small measure of power. "I'm tired," I said. "I think I'll go to bed early." "Good idea. You look exhausted." I did feel exhausted, but not from travel. I felt drained by the effort of pretending, of acting like everything was normal when my entire world had been turned upside down. That night, lying in bed next to my wife, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. I was done being the naive husband. I was done being lied to and manipulated and treated like a fool. It was time to take control of my own story. I started the next morning by opening my own bank account, one that Marta didn't know about. I transferred a significant portion of our joint savings, not enough to be theft, but enough to ensure I wouldn't be left with nothing if she decided to clean out our accounts. Then I called my lawyer and scheduled a consultation for the following week. I also did something that felt petty but necessary. I changed the password on our joint credit card accounts and set up alerts for any new purchases. If Marta was going to continue funding her secret life with our money, I wanted to know about it. The next few days were a masterclass in deception from both sides. Marta continued her performance as the devoted wife, while I played the role of the trusting husband. We had dinner together, watched television, discussed our children's lives and our weekend plans. To anyone watching, we would have looked like a normal, happy couple. But underneath the surface, we were both plotting. She was planning her next rendezvous with her secret world, and I was planning the end of our marriage. On Friday, she announced another work event. "It's a client presentation," she said. "Could run pretty late, so don't wait up." "Which client?" I asked, the same question I'd been asking all week. "The Morrison account. You know, the big retail chain." I nodded and smiled, but I was already planning my own evening. This time, I wasn't going to follow her or spy on her. This time, I was going to do something that would force the truth into the open, whether she was ready for it or not. After she left, I drove to Mills Lake myself, but instead of hiding in the trees with binoculars, I walked up to the mansion's front door and rang the bell. A woman in an expensive dress answered, looking surprised to see a stranger on the doorstep. "I'm looking for my wife," I said simply. "Marta Mitchell. I believe she's here." The woman's expression changed from surprise to something that might have been pity. "I think you'd better come in," she said, and just like that, the pretending was over. The woman who answered the door introduced herself as Catherine Walsh, and she led me through a foyer that was larger than my living room. The sounds of the party drifted from somewhere deeper in the house. Laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," Catherine said as we walked. She was probably in her 50s, elegant in the way that money and good breeding could create. "But perhaps it's better that you know." "How long has this been going on?" I asked. "Several months, maybe longer. Victoria introduced Marta to our group last fall." Victoria. Of course, it had started with Victoria. My sister-in-law had a talent for creating chaos and drawing others into it. But Marta was a grown woman who had made her own choices. We reached a set of French doors that opened onto the patio, where I'd watched my wife dance with another man. Catherine paused with her hand on the handle. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked. "Once you walk through these doors, there's no going back." "There's already no going back," I said. She nodded and opened the doors. The conversation stopped when I appeared. 20 or so people turned to look at me, their expressions ranging from surprise to embarrassment to something that might have been guilt. I scanned the group until I found Marta. She was standing near the bar, wearing a blue cocktail dress I'd never seen before. The silver-haired man was beside her, his hand resting possessively on her waist. When she saw me, her face went white. "Hello, Marta," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent patio. She stepped away from the silver-haired man, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Victoria appeared at her side, looking defiant rather than ashamed. "Evan," Victoria said. What are you doing here? Looking for my wife. Though I'm starting to think I don't know who that is anymore. The silver-haired man stepped forward, extending his hand with the kind of confidence that probably served him well in boardrooms and country clubs. Robert Steinberg, he said, I think we need to talk. I ignored his outstretched hand. I think I've seen enough. Marta finally found her voice. Evan, please, let me explain. Explain what? That you've been lying to me for months? That you've been living a double life while I sat at home like an idiot, believing everything you told me? It's not what you think. Really? Because what I think is that my wife has been having an affair while pretending to be working late and attending business dinners. The crowd was watching us like we were dinner theater, their expressions fascinated and uncomfortable. I realized I didn't care. Let them watch. Let them see what their little games had cost. Can we please discuss this privately? Marta asked, glancing around at the audience we'd attracted. Why? Are you embarrassed? Worried about what your new friends might think? Robert Steinberg cleared his throat. Perhaps we should all take a step back. Don't, I said, turning to face him. Don't you dare try to mediate this. You're sleeping with my wife. You don't get to play peacemaker. Evan! Marta's voice was sharp with mortification. What? Is that not what's happening here? Are you going to tell me this is all innocent? That you've been coming to these parties for months, lying to me about your whereabouts, because you enjoy the conversation? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. I looked around at the group of wealthy, well-dressed people who had welcomed my wife into their world while I remained oblivious at home. They looked uncomfortable now, probably wishing they were anywhere else. How many of you knew she was married? I asked. A few people looked away. Others studied their drinks with sudden intensity. How many of you knew she had a husband at home who thought she was working late? That's enough, Victoria said, stepping forward. You're making a scene. I'm making a scene? I'm not the one who's been sneaking around behind my spouse's back for months. You don't understand the situation, Victoria continued. Marta was unhappy. She needed something more than what you could give her. The words hit me like a physical blow, partly because of their cruelty and partly because there might have been some truth in them. Had Marta been unhappy? Had I been so focused on work and routine that I'd missed the signs? So instead of talking to me about it, she decided to find what she needed somewhere else, I said. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, Marta said quietly. I never meant for it to go this far. How far has it gone, Marta? Are you in love with him? She looked at Robert Steinberg, then back at me, and I saw the answer in her eyes before she spoke. I don't know, she whispered. Those 3 words finished what her lies had started. Whatever was left of our marriage crumbled in that moment, leaving nothing but the legal and financial entanglements that would take lawyers months to sort out. I want a divorce, I said. Evan, please, can't we try to work through this? Work through what? Your affair? Your lies? The fact that you've been living a completely separate life for months? People make mistakes. Marriages can survive infidelity. This wasn't a mistake, Marta. This was a choice. A series of choices. Every time you lied to me, every time you came to one of these parties, every time you let him touch you, those were all choices. I turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at her one more time. 24 years, I said. We've been married for 24 years. We have 2 children together. We built a life together, and you threw it all away for this. I didn't throw anything away. We can still... No, I said. We can't. I walked back through the mansion, past the expensive furniture and artwork, past Catherine Walsh, who was waiting in the foyer with a sympathetic expression. I'm sorry, she said as I reached the front door. So am I. The drive home passed in a blur. I felt strangely calm, like someone who had been carrying a heavy weight for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down. The uncertainty was over. the wondering and suspecting and hoping I was wrong, all of that was finished. Now I knew exactly where I stood, and I could act accordingly. I spent the rest of that weekend making phone calls and arrangements. I spoke to my lawyer, my financial advisor, and my boss. I also called Ross and Amelia and asked them to come home for dinner on Sunday. It was time to tell them what was happening to their family. Marta came home Saturday morning, looking exhausted and defeated. She tried to start a conversation about what had happened, but I cut her off. "I've filed for divorce," I said. "My lawyer will be in touch with you early next week." "You can't be serious. You're not even going to try to save our marriage?" "What marriage? The one where you lie to me constantly? The one where you're sleeping with another man? That marriage? It was an escape, a fantasy. It didn't mean anything." "It meant something to me, and apparently it means something to Robert Steinberg." She flinched at the name. "I'll end it. I'll stop seeing him. I'll quit the agency if I have to. We can start over." "No, we can't. Even if you ended it tomorrow, even if you never saw him again, I would never be able to trust you. Every time you were 5 minutes late coming home, every time you didn't answer your phone immediately, every time you went out with friends, I would wonder if you were lying to me again. That's not fair." "Fair? You want to talk about fair? Was it fair to make me feel crazy for asking simple questions about where you were? Was it fair to use our joint bank account to fund your affair? Was it fair to lie to our children about why you were never home?" She didn't have an answer for that. "I've opened my own bank account," I continued. "I've transferred half of our savings, which is more generous than you deserve. I've also canceled your access to our joint credit cards." "You can't do that. That's my money too." "It was our money. Now it's going to be divided according to what the law requires, not according to what you want." She stared at me like I was a stranger, which I suppose I was. The man she'd married would never have been so cold, so calculating. But that man had never been betrayed so thoroughly. Sunday dinner with the kids was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Ross drove up from his apartment in the city, and Amelia came home from her dorm. They were both excited to have a family dinner, chattering about their lives and plans while Marta and I sat at opposite ends of the table, barely speaking to each other. After we finished eating, I asked them to stay in the dining room. "Your mother and I have something we need to tell you," I began. They looked back and forth between us, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern. "We're getting divorced," I said simply. The silence that followed was deafening. Ross put down his water glass with exaggerated care. Amelia's eyes filled with tears. "Why?" she asked. I looked at Marta, giving her the opportunity to explain. When she didn't speak, I continued. "Sometimes marriages end. People grow apart, want different things. It's not anyone's fault." It was a lie, of course. It was absolutely someone's fault. But I wasn't going to destroy their relationship with their mother just to make myself feel better. "Are you sure?" Ross asked. "Can't you try counseling or something?" "We're sure," I said. "Where will you live?" Amelia wanted to know. "I'll be moving out. Your mother will keep the house for now. You'll both always have a place with either of us." "This is insane," Ross said, standing up from the table. "You guys have been married forever. You can't just give up." "We're not giving up," Marta said, speaking for the first time. "We're accepting that we're not the same people we were when we got married." It was a reasonable-sounding explanation that completely avoided the truth, but I didn't contradict her. The kids didn't need to know about Robert Steinberg or the parties at Mills Lake. They didn't need to know their mother was a liar and a cheat. They did need to know that I would always be their father, regardless of what happened between their parents. "I love you both," I said. "That will never change. This divorce is between your mother and me. It has nothing to do with how we feel about you." Amelia was crying openly now. Ross looked angry and confused. Neither of them understood how their stable, predictable family had suddenly fallen apart and I couldn't explain it to them without destroying their image of their mother. So I hugged them both and told them everything would be okay, even though I wasn't sure that was true. That night, I packed a suitcase and moved into a hotel. It was temporary. I would need to find an apartment, figure out a more permanent living situation, but I couldn't stay in the house another night. Every room held memories of the life we'd built together, the life that Marta had decided wasn't enough for her. As I drove away from the house where I'd lived for 15 years, where I'd raised my children and thought I'd grow old with my wife, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. The pretending was over. The uncertainty was finished. I knew exactly who I was now, a man whose wife had betrayed him, whose marriage had ended, whose life was about to change completely. It wasn't the identity I would have chosen, but at least it was honest. And after months of living with lies, honesty felt like a gift. 3 years passed before I saw Marta again. I'd built a new life in Phoenix, where the desert heat felt like a cleansing fire after the cold deceptions of my marriage. The divorce had been finalized within 8 months. Marta hadn't contested it, perhaps out of guilt, or perhaps because Robert Steinberg's lawyers had advised her that fighting would only make things messier. I kept the retirement accounts and half the house equity. She kept the house itself and most of the furniture, along with the life she'd chosen over our marriage. According to Ross and Amelia, she and Robert had been living together for over a year now, playing house in his mansion by the lake. My new job at a mid-sized investment firm paid well and kept me busy. I'd rented a small house in Scottsdale with a view of the mountains and a pool I actually used. The simplicity of my life was a revelation. No joint bank accounts to monitor, no schedules to coordinate, no lies to detect or ignore. I dated occasionally, nothing serious. A few dinners, some pleasant conversations, the kind of companionship that didn't require trust or vulnerability. I told myself I was content with this arrangement, though sometimes late at night I wondered if I'd ever be able to fully trust another person again. Ross visited twice a year, usually during his vacation time. He'd finished his engineering degree and landed a good job with a tech company in Seattle. He was careful not to mention his mother during his visits, though I could tell he maintained a relationship with her. I was glad. Whatever Marta had done to our marriage, she was still his mother. Amelia called every few weeks, usually late at night when she was struggling with some aspect of adult life that college hadn't prepared her for. She'd graduated with her journalism degree and was working for a small newspaper in Denver, writing about local politics and learning that changing the world was harder than she'd expected. She was more open about her frustration with Marta, though I tried to discourage her criticism. Anger was a luxury I could afford. She needed to find a way to forgive her mother, for her own sake, if not for Marta's. I thought I'd successfully closed the door on that chapter of my life. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in March, Marta appeared in the lobby of my office building. I was coming back from lunch when I saw her sitting in one of the leather chairs near the reception desk. She looked older. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, and her hair was shorter, more severe. She was still beautiful, but it was a different kind of beauty now, harder somehow. She stood up when she saw me, smoothing down her skirt with nervous hands. "Hello, Evan." "Marta." I tried to keep my voice neutral. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you, to talk to you." "We don't have anything to talk about." "Please, just a few minutes." I looked around the lobby, aware that we were attracting attention from the receptionist and a few other employees. Whatever Marta wanted to discuss, it wasn't appropriate for a public setting. "There's a coffee shop across the street," I said. 5 minutes. She nodded gratefully and followed me outside. The coffee shop was busy with the afternoon crowd, but we found a table in the back corner where we could talk without being overheard. I ordered black coffee. She asked for tea with honey, the same thing she'd ordered on our first date 27 years ago. I wondered if she remembered that, or if it was just habit. "You look good," she said after we'd settled at the table. Thank you. You do too. It was a polite lie. She looked tired, stressed, like someone carrying a weight she couldn't set down. How are Ross and Amelia? I asked. They're fine. Ross got promoted last month. Amelia is seeing someone new, a photographer she met at work. I know. We talk regularly. A flash of something, hurt, jealousy, crossed her face. Of course you do. We sat in awkward silence for a moment, two people who had once known each other better than anyone else in the world, now struggling to make small talk. Why are you here, Marta? She took a sip of her tea, gathering her thoughts. Robert and I broke up. I waited for her to continue, but she seemed to expect some kind of response from me. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. It ended 6 months ago. I've been having a hard time. What does that have to do with me? I made a mistake, Evan, a terrible mistake. I threw away the best thing in my life for something that was never real. You threw away our marriage for an affair. That wasn't a mistake, Marta. That was a choice. I know that. But I was confused, unhappy. I felt trapped in our life, like I was disappearing into routines and responsibilities. When Victoria introduced me to that world, it felt like I was waking up from a long sleep. So you decided to have an affair instead of talking to your husband about how you were feeling. I tried to talk to you, remember? I suggested we take a vacation, just the two of us. I asked if we could go to counseling. You said we didn't need it, that we were fine. I did remember those conversations vaguely. They'd seemed like minor complaints at the time, easily dismissed with reassurances and promises to spend more time together. Had I been too quick to assume everything was okay? Too focused on work and routine to notice that my wife was drowning? Even if that's true, I said, it doesn't justify what you did. If you were unhappy, you should have insisted on counseling. You should have demanded that I pay attention. You shouldn't have started sleeping with someone else. I know, you're right. I handled it in the worst possible way. Why are you telling me this now? She looked down at her tea, her fingers wrapped around the cup like she was trying to warm herself. Because I love you. I never stopped loving you. And I was hoping, maybe we could try again. The words hit me like a physical blow. For just a moment, I felt the ghost of the man I'd been before, the man who would have done anything to save his marriage, who would have forgiven almost anything to keep his family together. But that man was gone, replaced by someone harder and more cautious. No, I said, you haven't even thought about it. I don't need to think about it. The answer is no. Evan, please. We were good together once. We could be good together again. We were good together when we were both committed to making it work, when we trusted each other, when we were honest with each other. That's not who we are anymore. People change, people grow. We could learn from our mistakes. You could learn from your mistakes. I didn't make any mistakes, Marta. I was a faithful husband for 24 years. I supported your career, raised our children, paid the bills, and tried to be the kind of partner you deserved. The only mistake I made was trusting you. She flinched, as if I'd slapped her. That's not fair. You weren't perfect either. You were distant, preoccupied with work. You took me for granted. Maybe I did, but I never lied to you. I never betrayed you. I never made you question your own sanity by denying things you knew were true. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for all of it. I know you are. But being sorry doesn't change what happened. It doesn't give me back the months I spent wondering what was wrong with me, why my wife was pulling away, whether I was losing my mind. So that's it? You won't even consider giving us another chance? I looked at her across the table, this woman I'd loved more than anyone else in the world, and felt nothing but sadness. Not anger anymore. I'd worked through that with the help of a therapist and time and distance. Just sadness for what we'd lost, for what could never be recovered. I have given us another chance, I said, I gave us another chance every time you came home late, and I chose to believe your explanations. I gave us another chance every time you lied to me, and I ignored the voice in my head that said something was wrong. I gave us another chance every time I caught you in a contradiction and decided to trust you instead of my own instincts. That's not the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. You want me to pretend the last 3 years didn't happen, to forget what I learned about who you really are when you think no one is watching. You want me to trust you again, knowing what you're capable of when you're unhappy or bored or feeling trapped. I would never do it again. You said you would never do it the first time. On our wedding day, you promised to forsake all others. You promised to be faithful in good times and bad. You broke those promises, Marta. Why should I believe you wouldn't break them again? She was crying now, quiet tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. A few people at nearby tables glanced over, probably wondering what drama was playing out in the corner. Because I love you, she said. Because I know what I lost. Because I would do anything to fix this. You can't fix this. Some things once broken can't be repaired. They can only be replaced. With what? With whom? I don't know. Maybe with no one. Maybe I'll spend the rest of my life alone, and maybe that's okay. Maybe that's better than spending it with someone I can never fully trust again. She stared at me like I was a stranger, which I suppose I was. The man she'd married would have taken her back, would have been grateful for the chance to save his marriage. But that man had been naive, trusting to a fault. This man had learned that love without trust was just elaborate self-deception. I should go, she said, gathering her purse and standing up from the table. Marta. She turned back, hope flickering in her eyes. I hope you find what you're looking for. I really do. I hope you find someone who makes you happy, someone you won't feel the need to lie to or cheat on. You deserve that. Everyone deserves that. Even you? Even me. She nodded and walked away, leaving me alone with my coffee and the ghosts of 24 years of marriage. I sat there for a long time, thinking about the conversation, about the choices that had brought us to this point. Part of me wondered if I was being too rigid, too unforgiving. Maybe other couples had survived worse betrayals. Maybe love was supposed to be strong enough to overcome anything. But I'd learned something about myself during those 3 years in Phoenix. I valued honesty more than I valued companionship. I'd rather be alone than be with someone I couldn't trust. It wasn't a choice I would have made at 30 or 40, but at 52, I knew who I was and what I needed. I finished my coffee and walked back to the office, back to my simple, honest life. I had work to do, calls to make, a future to build that didn't include the woman who had once been the center of my world. That evening, I called both Ross and Amelia to let them know their mother had visited me. I didn't want them to hear about it secondhand and wonder why I hadn't told them. How do you feel about it? Amelia asked. Sad, I said, but not surprised and not tempted. Good. I mean, I'm sorry you're sad, but I'm glad you're not tempted. She doesn't deserve another chance. She's still your mother, sweetheart. I know, and I love her. But I also know what she did to you, to our family. Some things can't be undone. Ross was more diplomatic in his response, but I could hear the same sentiment underneath his carefully neutral words. Our children had learned something about trust and consequences that I wished they'd never had to learn. 2 weeks later, I got a call from my lawyer. Marta had been in an accident. Not serious, but she'd been drinking and had been charged with driving under the influence. She'd listed me as her emergency contact, probably out of habit, and the hospital had called my old number. The call had been forwarded to my lawyer, who had been handling my affairs since the divorce. I thought about calling her, about driving back to check on her, about offering whatever support I could as the father of her children, if not as her former husband. But in the end, I did nothing. She had Robert Steinberg, or maybe she didn't. She had Victoria, or maybe she didn't. She had friends and colleagues and a life she'd chosen over the one we'd built together. She didn't have me, and that was a choice she'd made long before I'd made the choice to let her go. I never saw Marta again. 6 months later, Ross called to tell me she'd been found in her car in the garage, the engine running, a note on the passenger seat apologizing for the pain she'd caused. The official cause was carbon monoxide poisoning, an accident according to the police report, though Ross and I both knew better. I flew back for the funeral, sat in the back of the church while her family and friends said goodbye to a woman I'd once known better than myself. Victoria was there, looking older and more fragile than I remembered. Robert Steinberg was there too, standing apart from the family, his face a mask of controlled grief. I didn't speak to either of them. I didn't speak to anyone except Ross and Amelia, who clung to me like anchors in a storm. We were a family again, the three of us, bound together by loss and love and the complicated legacy of the woman who had given them life and taken her own. After the service, we went back to the house where I'd once lived, where Marta had made the choices that destroyed our marriage and ultimately led to her lonely end. Ross and Amelia packed up their childhood belongings while I sat in the kitchen, remembering better times. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a sunflower, was a photo from our last family vacation. Ross was 19, Amelia 17, both of them tan and laughing on a beach in Florida. Marta and I stood behind them, my arms around her waist, both of us smiling at the camera. We looked happy. We looked like people who would be together forever. I took the photo down and put it in my pocket, not because I wanted to remember the lie, but because I wanted to remember that for a while, it hadn't been a lie. For a while, we had been happy. For a while, we had been a family. That was worth remembering, even if it was all we had left. I flew back to Phoenix the next day, back to my simple life in the desert. Ross and Amelia would visit more often now, I knew. They would need time to grieve and heal, and I would help them however I could. But I wouldn't grieve for Marta, not the way I once would have. I'd already grieved for her 3 years ago, when I'd discovered that the woman I'd married had become someone I didn't recognize. What happened in that garage was the end of a story that had really ended much earlier, in a mansion by a lake where she'd chosen a fantasy over the reality we'd built together. I would always love the woman I'd married, the mother of my children, the partner who had shared my dreams and struggles for 24 years. But that woman had been gone long before her body stopped breathing, and I had learned, finally, to let her go.